Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Women Connect India Speaker Series 3.0 webinar. I'm your host, Ritesh Datta, and I'm looking forward to today's discussion about cyber harm protection and safeguard for early digital users. Uh, the month of October is globally celebrated as the Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and the topic for discussion today could not have been planned at a better time. So for us advocates of digital gender inclusion, this month is particularly relevant as it allows us to a chance to reflect on our work, our interventions to bridge the gender digital divide, and to reflect how effectively we are and we have been able to equip our audiences, our target audience, with the knowledge and capacity to safeguard themselves from the risks that come with adopting digital tools. For this discussion, we have with us today two accomplished practitioners, Persis Silva from the Rati Foundation and Shruti Nagpal from the Asian School of Cyber Laws, who have graciously agreed to share their learnings and experience with us. So without much further ado, we'll jump into the conversation. Our first speaker today is Shruti. Shruti Nagpal is a legal edtech entrepreneur. She's a content creator, a cyber and intellectual property law enthusiast, and she's also the co-founder and chief education officer at the Asian School of Cyber Laws. Thank you, Shruti, for taking the time to be with us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ritesh. So without taking too much of your time, I'm going to jump right into this. Imagine this. In a village in Uttar Pradesh lives Madho, who is commonly known as the local Gunda, right? He's a drunk, but he comes from a rich and influential farming family and so has the power to influence the local panchayat also. Now, Meera is a middle-aged mother of two sons and a young daughter. As her daughter grows, Meera, based on her own life experience, warns her daughter to avoid Madhav. She gives her the tips and the tricks that she can use. Stuff like don't stand around chit-chatting for too long with your friends, don't stay out too long, especially in the dark. At no point confront Madhu and people like him and avoid the area where he's usually to be found, right? This is how Meera's own mother trained her. Now, Meera has a smartphone and a young boy from a nearby village has started messaging her daughter. She watches as her daughter talks to him on the phone. She listens in and hears the casual language, sometimes teasing, sometimes challenging. She sees the selfies, all ordinary, that her daughter has sent to this boy. She's been plagued by a vague sense of worry, but she has no words of warning or of wisdom. Her mother's learning now does not hold true, and that's where the problem lies. Women's sense of caution is far more developed in the real world. There's someone who may need muting. I mean, please just okay. Women's sense of caution is far more developed in the real world. We read scenarios, we read faces, we read body language, but with the internet, there is a lack of sensory perceptions and a general lack of generational learning. So those are things that basically warn us of impending danger, right? You don't face anyone, and hence the belief is that the virtual world is far safer. But just because you don't see the danger does not mean it doesn't exist. Now, when you come to sons in villages, if a mother sees her son loitering about with his friends, not really doing any work, she'll take a stick to his behind. But if he works a little, and he is mostly at home, and he works on his phone, she doesn't question it. In fact, she praises him. But what is it that he does on his phone? Since mothers cannot teach their children, children learn from the wrong sources. And hence, a lot more financial crimes, a whole new category of pornography called village porn, which, by the way, emerges with stuff like young women sharing their images and videos, nude images and videos with their partners. Male domination, for example, where a woman is unable to say no to a recording by her partner. But what is never considered, never questioned is what if the phone gets compromised? right? And also another issue that we are seeing now is, I think, a far earlier introduction to pornography to youngsters. Now, when you consider what are the reasons for cybercrimes, one, like I said already, not knowing whom to trust and what to base that trust on. The other one would probably be not a very high level of segregation of safe spaces. Just to take an example, fields in place of toilets, or unsafe and common bathing spaces, which gives rise to peeping Tom cases, which basically means someone who, or cases of voyeurism, or someone watches people while they are performing their own private tasks, right? And this can be recorded, this can be put on the internet. These are the kind of issues that people face. Now, in 2014, if I'm not wrong, the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana introduced, with the best of intentions, introduced bank accounts to the unbanked people of India. Now, with it came ATM cards or debit cards in every hand. So, what if you didn't know what to do with them, right? At which point of time, what do? You turn to the people you supposedly trust, or people who are supposed to be there to help you. For example, middlemen, or for example, in states like Rajasthan, the e-Mitra scheme, right? But then it also leaves you open to or vulnerable to crimes committed by these people whom you're supposed to trust, right? Now, the last reason that I would say, and by the way, it's part of the seven sins. I love using that whole, seven sins of seven cyber sins, but I'm going to talk only about two: fear and greed. Let's take an example. Many of these women fall prey to, for example, OTP based crimes. Now, OTP is one time password. This kind of a crime is usually a combination of phishing, which, by the way, is taking people, fraudulently taking them to a website which may be fake, to respond to an email which may be coming from a fake email ID, and thereby trying to gain their trust and their uh, financial details, their personal details, all of that. The idea is to fleece people, right? At the end of such transactions, what is required is always the one time password. It depends on the skill of the fraudster, how you get that one time password out. The purpose of a one time password is to authenticate the person making the transaction in the context of that specific transaction which they want to make. They need to be able to say that if, say, for example, Gayatri wants to make a payment to Garima, the OTP will verify the fact that it is indeed Gayatri who is intending to make the transaction and is hence paying Garima, right? Now, take an example like this. Many women in villages today are are owners of small home-based businesses, right? Now, if someone shows an interest in the goods that you hope to sell, then naturally you would want to encourage such people. Um, but when they receive a link which says, if you click on this link and you enter the one-time password that you get, you will receive your payment. If they are not aware that a one-time password can only be used to authenticate a payment being made, not received, they are about to lose that money. There are similar frauds, of course. One would be, say, for example, bank account deactivation. Very common fraud where you get a call which says your account is going to be deactivated unless within a specified time limit you fill in this form, you put in your bank details, you put in your password, and you basically enter the OTP that comes to you, or you give it to the person who has called you. Very, very common fraud. Another one being your insurance policy is lapsing. Please understand, every time you hear these words, you will realize that there is fear that is being played upon, right? Now there is also greed. So some exciting limited time close-ended scheme which you can get money under. Now another one that you can think of is a new scheme which has been introduced by the Prime Minister of the country, under which you can receive a certain amount of money, right? People get tempted. They feel, oh, of course, I need the extra money. Might be with temptation. That reminds me. Another one is the loan app fraud. When women who have their own homes, they have their businesses, when they are not able to get money from the local known money lender, they often resort to these loan apps. While the rates of interest can be as high as 100%, the amounts are small. And so the temptation is that at least I'll get the money that I require right now. What they don't realize is as often as not, they are asked to download an app which usually gives access of their entire device to the person who is trying to defraud them. Right. The other one that I would want to also talk about, since it's become such a, it's a technology which is such a beautiful technology, and that is the UPI or Unified Payments Interface System, right? Up until now, UPI is used by a lot of these platforms. So, for example, if you want to, thanks, Ritesh. So, for example, if you want to make payments over WhatsApp, you want to make payments over Google Pay, all of these use the UPI interface, right? The idea was that up until now, if someone had a smartphone, yes, there was the fear that they could become victims of a UPI fraud. But now the UPI technology has come up with something called the UPI 123 Pay, whereby all that you need to do is you dial an IVR number, a certain number on your, you can use your regular feature phone. And by that, I mean the Samsung Guru kind of phone, which basically will allow you to make a call, take a call, read your SMS, and basically use it like a torch. That is the phone that I'm talking about. You choose your language, you choose one to confirm your details, you choose your UPI ID related bank, you choose the number to whom you want to make the payment, you put in the amount, confirm with your UPI ID PIN, and that's it. You can make a payment despite the fact that your phone has no smartphone features. But the thing is, now imagine if on another call, a number, you're getting a call which tells you, I'm sorry, but your bank account is going to get deactivated. You need to do these steps. At which point, most people switch off their minds and listen to the instructions. Now, if the instructions say you basically need to make a payment to so and so number, they'll make the payment. And you're not anymore, or they say you share your OTP with us. That fraud can happen because now you're listening to someone else, not applying your own mind. So that's the other one that I would want to talk about. And the last one, which is, I think now it's a national affliction. Sometimes I get the feeling. You see a ball rolling towards you. What's the first human instinct? You kick it. And when you see a link forwarded by anybody on earth, and it does not matter whether you know the person or you don't, you see a link, and the basic human instinct seems to have become to click it. And this is how so many of these new frauds work, whether it is the remote access apps, which basically you end up downloading an app which gives access of your device to a fraudster, or for that matter, phishing, or for that matter, fake apps being downloaded just because the link is wrong. So I think recently there was that whole case where the railway had issued a warning saying that there are a lot of links going around. If you click on the link, it claims to download the IRCTC Rail Connect app, but it doesn't. What you end up downloading is a fake app. And it all starts with one click. So, what are our suggestions in this? My suggestion is a cyber safety toolkit. And I would request all of you to give your inputs on this. But my cyber safety toolkit, which the Asian School of Cyber Laws has suggested, and we've come up with a name for it, it's called SWATI. Asian School's cyber safety toolkit is called SWATI. It's an acronym. It stands for Secure Women's Access to Technology and Information. Swati is also another name for the Indian goddess of learning, which is Saraswati. So I think it's sort of apt. But so what we are trying to do, let me introduce you to this toolkit. The toolkit will be a collection of videos, very short ones, preferably under 1 minute, and highly visual posters. These will be made in multiple languages, naturally starting with Hindi, because I believe that's a language that will reach the masses very quickly. The posters can be put up at Anganwadis, they can be put up at hospitals, clinics, schools, ration shops. They can be combined to make booklets if they need to be handed over to people at different points in a village. Every poster and video will have an explanation, a short one, of a specific cybercrime. It will also end with what to do if such a cybercrime does occur. Because see, all said and done, we can try our best as much as we want to try to prevent it. But there is always the other side of it, which means that the crime has happened and we now need to do something about it, right? I would also want to promote the Indian government's wonderful endeavor, which they have started under cybercrime.gov.in. And for that matter, that the number 1930, I'm just putting it out there here also, because that's one great way to report a cybercrime, especially within the first hour of realizing that this has happened. Okay. Every video and poster needs to have an open conversation that needs to be had. It could be about pornography, it could be about sextortion, it could be about uncomfortable topics, but it needs to be spoken of. What I'm going to leave you with very quickly, and I hope I'm still within my 15 minutes, is I invite you all to collaborate with us. Please give us your inputs and your cases, because I kid you not, I can be as much in the field as I want to be. But the way reading up about this seminar and this thing online has opened my eyes. I could not even imagine that cases were happening at that level. So at the grassroots level, you guys are all experts. Please bring in your inputs and cases. Please collaborate with us. And I would love to have all of you help me take this forward. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Ritesh. If there are any questions, I would love to take them on.
Of course, Shuchi. So we have a question and answer session planned later. We'll do that. Thank you also, Gokul, for sharing the cybercrime website. Shuchi, I think what you talked about, outlining this, issues of cyber crime and fraud, and talking about the toolkit, that's so relevant to all the work that all of us here do. And I'm pretty sure we will have more things to ask you and learn from you when we come back to the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So moving on to our next speaker, Persis. Persis Silva is an advocate for the rights of women and children. She's a law practitioner and she's a director of the Mumbai-based Rati Foundation, which has been doing some fantastic work. Persis, please take the stage and share your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Ritesh. Thank you. Thanks, Suchi. As you were speaking about the cases, so many of the cases that actually come to our trust line were, playing out in my mind. So thank you for that very, very useful conversation. Thank you. I'm just going to check if my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes,
it is. It is. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't want to spread any panic, but when we actually study data as far as cyber crimes in our country is concerned, there has been a huge spike in cases of cybercrime. And that is not something that is reported by a few organizations, but it has been repeatedly reported by the NCRB, by NICMEG, by police machinery, that there has been a substantial spike in cases of cyber reporting. And not only has there been a substantial spike, there's also been a substantial spike specifically when it comes to cyber crimes against women and children. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to speak a little about Rati's trust line that we have. It's called Mary Trust Line. It's a helpline. It's 6363176363. And we launched this helpline last year in July of 2022. And when we initially launched the helpline, we said it is for children who face online harms to reach out to us. And slowly, as the helpline started getting calls, we realized that we were also getting a lot of calls from women. And it was not possible for us to tell women that, sorry, we can't help you or we can't assist you. We are only for children up to 18 years old. So we would get calls from 21-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 25-year-olds. And what we realized is that there was a dearth of support that women and children who face online harms have. Yes, we have cybercrime.gov. Yes, we have other helplines. But what tends to happen is that those become reporting mechanisms. And because Rati had engaged with women and children who face domestic violence, have faced sexual violence on ground, we realized that when we talk about on-ground cases, we say that children and women need mental health support. They need social support. They need support to, how do they break the news to their families, right? Then legal support is not only reporting the crime, but taking it from the FIR to the judgment, right? Helping it reach its logical conclusion. And those sort of support mechanisms were widely missing. And that's somewhere where the idea of Meri Trust Line came up, where we said that the trust line will provide multiple support to women and to children. We've also done some research when it comes to cases of online harms and children facing online harms. And the first ideal internet study that we did was pre-pandemic, where we tried to study the consequences that children faced in cases of cybercrimes. But we also tried to study what is the usage of the internet. And when the first ideal internet report was released and it was pre-pandemic, we said that there is a divide. There is a very clear urban and rural divide when it comes to internet usage. And the second divide is also girls and boys, young adult girls and young adult boys. So this difference was when it came to meaningful access, there was difference. When it came to access to handsets, there was difference. How they engage with the internet was so different. And this is the second study, the Ideal Internet Study 2.0, in fact, which we released just a day ago, which came up and gave us some very interesting insights about the way children use the internet. And one of our findings was that 83% of the participants use shared devices. And this particular study was done in mostly under-resourced districts. And we realized that 83% children were actually sharing their devices. So their shared devices were between siblings, they were between family members, but they did not have exclusive use to that device, right? And 89% of children from the rural areas that we interviewed did not have meaningful access to the internet. Girls had very limited access to the internet, sometimes as less as 30 minutes to 1 hour, even during the pandemic. And this included their study time online, right? So there was this, there was a lot of talk about children suddenly being on the internet during the pandemic. And while that may be true for a certain set of children, right? Other children who come from relatively marginalized backgrounds, and I mean, even in a city like Bombay, when we started the study, we started it from Govandi, and under-resourced areas, urban areas, even within cities, the internet access and the internet divide was huge. And I think that really helped us understand even how boys and girls engage with the internet. So for example, when it comes to gaming, girls were happy to play games, but with friends and close family members. When it came to boys, a larger percentage were willing to play games with unknown people that they didn't know. The nature of the games were very different. While girls would play card games, Ludo, the boys would play, games like PUBG. So they were very different when it came to privacy settings, right? When it came to apps and privacy settings, children had more or less an idea of privacy settings. But the moment you ask them that if something goes wrong, how do I report to the app? They had no education on that, right? One of the most startling and for us very sad thing was that none of the children that we interviewed had any idea of cybercrime.gov or the POXO e-books. 0% children. There were a high percentage of children who were aware of Childline, because the Childline service is something that has really penetrated into the country. But unfortunately, with the present situation of Childline, we don't know how long that's going to be. So one mechanism that they are aware of, or they have been educated about, now may not exist. So where do children, or where do we expect children to reach out? Where do we expect young adults to reach out when they face any form of harassment or any harm online? So that was very, very critical for us. Of course, there are a lot of findings, and these are just the highlights. I'm happy to subsequently share an e-copy with Ritesh of the report, and circulate it among anyone who would be interested to read it. So as I said, the helpline really does provide various supports. And these were the support that we identified in on-ground cases of sexual violence, domestic violence, or harassment that women and children face. And we realized that in the online space, it is also the similar sort of support that women and children require. But in the online space, the biggest ask that any child or young adult came to us was, take my content down. That was the biggest pain point. So for example, when we get cases of loss of intimate content, it's intimate content that a girl may have shared with her partner with her consent. And then subsequently, there is a breakdown in the relationship becomes toxic, she may want to end the relationship, and then he uses that content to threaten her, right? So either he starts circulating it, or he starts threatening it. He may not directly put it online, but he starts sending it to her mother, to her father, to a friend, and he's using that to threaten her, to say, meet me, or let's resume the relationship. So there is an online harm, and there's also an offline harm, because she's scared that now he's going to land up at my house, right? So very often cases that we see of online harms are online as well as offline, physical harm as well as harm that is in the online space. Of course, mental health support is something that is critical. A very important aspect that we have realized with children and women who face online harms is that those who don't have support systems, a supportive partner, a supportive parent, a supportive friend, when they face any risk, they are at a higher risk. But the moment the child or the adult tells someone they trust, they tell their partner, they tell their parent, they tell someone else, the risk automatically reduces. So those are support mechanisms that we try and build. And this is something that we feel, basically the trust line is something that we feel is what we need to provide is holistic support. So 32% of the victims that called in the past year are below 18 years of age. And we had the youngest victim who called in who was 12 years. The oldest victim who called in was 58 years. And 88% of our cases came from this age group of 13 to 25. And what we realized is that this is the age group which accesses the internet, which is also comfortable with the internet, because in many ways they've been born into the internet. So the way they access the internet, the way they use the internet is very, very different from, say, someone who, like a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old accesses and uses the internet. We're still at a one arm's distance. We're still a little we're not sure, or there is ignorance. But when it comes to 13 to 25, their engagement with the internet is very, very different. Just some of the different types of cases of abuse that have come to the trust line. I'm going to share a copy of the slides with Ritesh. And so if anyone would like to go through this in greater detail. When we work with children, and when people call us to schools or to colleges or to communities and say, create cyber awareness, explain to children what is the risk that they face online. At least, we are very, very sure that we do not want to spread any panic, right? The internet is here to stay. There are some great things that children, and even through our research, children have told us that they've learned of the internet. Women and children benefit a lot from the internet in so many ways. So the best thing to do is give them tools, right? And this common misconception, children are addicted to the internet. I mean, you go to any school and the teacher will tell you, the children in my class are addicted to the internet. And this addiction word is used so loosely. And we're constantly trying to say it's not an addiction. It may be excessive use, but you cannot term it as an addiction, right? So how do you engage with the internet in a way that is healthy, in a way that is not risk-taking? And at the same time, if you tell a 13 or a 14-year-old, don't do this, they're definitely going to do it and definitely going to try and do it. So even if you are doing something, how do you do it with the least risk? I think that is very critical. And that is something that through our programs, we're constantly trying to have these conversations with children. How do you use the internet safely? How do you have stronger passwords? How do you share content with people you are only comfortable with? How do you, even if you are sharing intimate content, because today the pressure on girls to share intimate content is huge. So even if you share intimate content, how are you sharing this intimate content? One of the things that came out in the last 1 year is that we realized that victims and perpetrators, there was a great imbalance in the information available. So girls, for example, who suffered from any form of sexual harassment online with someone who they met online, had very little or no information about this boy. But the perpetrator, the boy, on the other hand, had a lot of information about the girl. He knew where she stayed. He had her mother's number. He had friends' numbers. He was on some WhatsApp groups with common people. And so that those are conversations that we always try and have, that if you are meeting someone online and you're becoming friends with them, ensure that the exchange of communication is both ways. Also girls, because shared devices are used a lot more by girls. Today she's using her mother's phone and messaging her boyfriend. Tomorrow she's using her father's phone. Day after she's using her brother's phone. So now this boyfriend, after 1 year, if he uses, he wants to threaten her, he has the mother's number, father's number, and brother's number. He knows exactly where she stays. He knows which college, which school she goes to. But girls had very little information. And that also made it very difficult for us in the process of reporting. The lesser information you have about the perpetrator, the more difficult the reporting mechanisms are as well. So that is something that we're constantly engaging to say, ensure that the exchange of information is both ways, right? These are just some of the sections. I mean, I don't want to go into technicalities, but just some of the various sections of the law that can be used, because I think one of the questions that came in the needs assessment was that what are the provisions of the law that we can use? And so these are some of the sections, in a summarized manner. So this is pretty much, what I wanted to speak about. But I also think it's very critical that when we talk about crimes, when we talk about reporting of crimes, we also have to work equally hard to strengthen our systems, right? So for example, when girls complain on cybercrime.gov, or when girls even walk into police stations and say, I want to register an FIR, the content is not taken down. So even after an FIR is lodged, I have cases in a city like Mumbai where the police have not been able to take the content down. And that's a huge, huge gap. Or we are speaking to the intermediary, we are speaking to the social media platforms, and somehow through the trust line, we have been able to engage with grievance officers, we have been able to engage with various social media platforms to get this content down. So maximum number of cases do come to us from Instagram. And slowly over the years, we have learned how do you get this content down. And the moment the content is down, the risk reduces. The perpetrator realizes that the victim is now in charge of the situation. And even her mental health improves because all the anxiety, all the trauma was because this is out there. So that really helps her navigate the case much more easily. So I think that is something that we generally feel that law enforcement also needs to work on. And when it comes to the police, how do they engage with electronic data? How do they engage with electronic evidence? I remember when the POCSO Act came in 2012, one of the things that was mentioned and is mentioned in the POCSO Act is that the perpetrator and the victim cannot come in contact with one another throughout the investigation and throughout the trial. And we said that's great because one of the biggest challenges for victims was that they had to constantly see the abuser. And in cases of children facing online harms or young adults facing online harms, when we've taken them to police stations, we've seen police officers take the mobile phone or take the device that has all this very sensitive data, and 5 male officers are sitting at the police station and looking at it and pointing and saying, ye kya hai, wo kya hai, why did she send this image? Why did she not send this image? Right? So even creating SOPs with law enforcement as to how do you ensure that when it comes to online crimes, when it comes to cyber crimes, how do you deal with that evidence in such a way that the victim is not inconvenienced, that the victim is not further traumatized? So I think we're still in that space of physical harm. And the entire focus now will be slowly towards online harms, cases that have an element of physical harm and online harms as well. So I think those are very, very critical conversations to have. And I think just as we talk about protecting girls in a physical space, we need to also talk about protection from, a space of, from the online space. So it has to be, these sort of conversations now have to be had in parallel, and they cannot happen in isolation, because I think we're online all the time. Like people always say online harms, but I think we're online all the time. Like, my phone is here and WhatsApp is on and suddenly I'm online, right? I'm talking to you all, I'm online. Like we're just online all the time. So let's not distinguish these conversations anymore. And let's have a common conversation when we talk about safety, when we talk about protection, without spreading any form of panic, and education and awareness. So yes.
Thank you, Persis. We will come to questions, but I just wanted to say that, this was so helpful. You built on, what Shuchi talked about. And your work has been so inspiring at Rati Foundation. And so glad that, both of you are here. So, I mean, this entire conversation is so critical for all of us working in the digital inclusion space. I think, both of you sort of outlined it so beautifully, with Shuchi coming in and giving us an overview of the type of cyber frauds and harm that is happening. You talked about, Shuchi, the government mechanisms that are out there for preventive and redressals as well. You talked about the cyber toolkit that you all are developing, and you sort of also requested others for support. I hope people sort of reach out to you. Persis, I think one, you have been doing the work on ground, and with your helpline, it was great to know about it, but it was also so good to hear about your experiences and your findings. A few points, in fact, one point that you made was so important, which in fact is, I think, one of the myths among people when they start working into it, is that, online harm and offline harm can be seen separately. They can't, because these two are so intertwined.
Absolutely.
Just two more points I also wanted to add. Again, based on the conversations I've had with other organizations which are getting into this. One is that this happens more in urban areas, not so much in rural, because people are still catching up to technology or using very limited. There's enough research to show that that harm and fraud is happening so much in rural area, and even in popular culture, I keep thinking about this Netflix series, if any of you have seen, called Jamtara, which is basically based on a small semi-urban town in Jharkhand, where an entire generation of youth get into cyber crimes, cyber fraud, and they're able to defraud people across data, the status, across economic situations, across the rural and urban divide. That's one. The other thing that I have also sort of heard is, or rather sort of observed is, when we, and but rightly so, we in NGOs, we tend to sort of work with our target audiences very specifically. But the moment you're looking at cyber fraud and cyber harm, that is generally not enough. Case in point, I remember having a conversation with a few of these women from self-help groups in Jharkhand, and a woman talked about, how she had left her phone at home. Her husband picked it up. They got a call and they finally lost about 40,000 rupees. And in a country like India, where people are using phones within families, um, it may not be enough to just, focus on our target groups and possibly look at households as well, and how we are able to influence them. Um, Let me now open the conversation for questions. Uh, Friends, please use the raise hand function if you have a raise hand function if you have a question. Remember to unmute yourself, state your name and organization, mention the name of the panelist you have questions for, and then ask the question. Um, please go ahead. Well, while we are waiting for questions, Shuchi, I just wanted to maybe start with you. You touched upon the cyber safety toolkit. Swati, do you want to talk a little more about it? Where you are, what's happening on that?
To be very honest, it started off as an idea which we had thought that we would like to try to promote to organizations which are working at the grassroots level. But honestly, I felt that it was such an easy idea to implement that I realized that having having planned it out. So we've already actually started building the content that we want to put up. We would like to actually now start sharing it. And honestly, I loved listening to Persis about the Mary Trust Line, this thing, because I think it's a fantastic way to get in touch with people. So that is exactly what I would want to do. We're already in the process. I think over the next, say, at least the Hindi video should be coming out really quickly. I'm also going to try and invite others so that different languages we can see videos coming in, because that's one of the easiest ways of getting through to different areas, right? Because you speak the language. Once you speak the language, it sort of settles in so much faster.
Sorry, it could be my internet. I'm sorry. The connection. Great. Thank you so much for that, Shuchi. Persis, for you, I wanted to understand a little more about the helpline that you talked about. You work in Bombay, in Mumbai. So sorry. So should I repeat my question, or did you
Yes.
get?
I kind of got the gist of it. So I'll just give you a little overview about the helpline. So our helpline is Mary Trust Line. In the chat, I've just put up our helpline number. It's 6363176363. It basically addresses or for women and children who face online harms. Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. you can call in. And as I mentioned earlier, the support that we offer is, of course, informational and awareness. But in addition to that, mental health support, legal guidance, and content takedown, right? So we understand that when we get calls, we sometimes get calls directly from children. Sometimes it is an adult calling on behalf of a child, right? But the primary needs are, of course, immediately to educate them, awareness, understand the case, then provide them mental health support, because sometimes that in itself is an immediate requirement, and content takedown, and legal guidance, legal support where necessary. So yes, we are based in Mumbai. The Trust Line functions out of our office in Mumbai, but it is an all India helpline. And in cases that we identify that the child or the woman may need support on ground, we have a network of organizations in other states as well. So we link the child or link the woman to that organization when we feel that support over the phone may not be sufficient. So we will also link them. We also link children to other child protection services in their district. So the Child Welfare Committee, if Childline is still functioning in that district, then them, the DCPUs, other, child rights organizations. So we link them to various state and non-state systems based on their needs as well.
Thank you for that, Persis. I think Tejaswini has a question. Tejaswini, do you want to ask?
Of your both of your talks were very relevant to a lot of work we're doing in Yuganthar, and I wanted to tell Shuchi that the toolkit you're developing, really like to use it and translate into Telugu, which is the language we are using here, and we are actually spreading the use of 123 Pay.
Oh, that's good.
Am I
That's
audible?
wonderful. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, my internet is also unstable. So versus I had a specific question. Recently we were helping a young woman with a cybercrime. What had happened is a boy she was friends with, maybe they were seeing each other, I'm not sure, but he downloaded a parental control app on her phone without her knowledge. It was it caused a lot of trouble. She went to the police, all of that happened. But one of the things.
You in between.
Oh, okay. Is it okay now?
Yes, much better. Yes.
Tejaswini, we lost you again.
Would you like to type your question? Would that be easier if your internet connection is unstable?
Vika knows of the case too. Maybe she can say. Should I give it a last try before I type?
Yes, please go ahead, Tejaswini.
Sure.
This is basically that this boy downloaded a parental control app on this girl's phone and started accessing the information from her phone, and a lot of people suggested that.
Sorry, Tejaswini, I think we are losing you. Navika, do you want to come in and maybe just share a little bit about what, if you know the context? Yes, Navika, please go ahead.
I know the context, but I think the question I'm not too sure that Tejaswini wants to ask. But what happened was this girl, this was a friend of hers, and at some point he had access to her phone and he downloaded one of these parental control apps. And then he started sort of, I think at some point he asked her out and she said no, and he didn't take it too well. And then he started blackmailing her and saying things like, I can see you and I sort of have access to you. And so she filed a police complaint. And she was not studying in Hyderabad. And then she was told that if you want any action to be taken, you have to come to Hyderabad to do it. And when she did come to Hyderabad, we went with her. Initially, the cybercrime cell was kind enough to hear what we had to say. But all the police stations were extremely absolutely unhelpful. And it became completely on her to sort of justify what had happened. And they kept looking for reasons to let him go. And the whole thing was that his future would get wasted and nobody was even thinking of her future. And there was, and they wanted her parents involved, but didn't want to, even though she was a major. And they didn't care about his parents. And so her point was that if you're calling my parents and you're making this into a family thing, why aren't his parents being called? And there was just no action which was taken. And for us, it got a little tiring. And I think Tejaswini had a question around this. So I guess if she just types it out, it would be helpful.
Sure. I think until she types, this police apathy exists and this police judgment to women. We constantly say women should report, children should report. And this is something, whether it is crimes that happen in the online or in the offline space to women and children, there's this huge push towards reporting. But the moment a child or a young adult or a woman goes to report, the apathy that she has to face from the system, the judgment that she has to face from the system is unsurmountable on most occasions, right? And that will actually deter women from reporting. There was a recent article by a very senior police officer from Maharashtra, where he's written an article saying that we get almost 5 cases of sextortion per day in certain police stations. And the percentage of reported crimes, when you actually see the FIRs registered, there are so less, they are so few. So if you are getting 5 reported cases, why aren't they actually actioned into FIRs is a big question mark, right? So is it because the system deliberately, and my reading is, and I may be cynical, but the system deliberately tries to tire the child or the woman to such an extent that she says, forget it. I don't want to do this and I don't want to engage with this. So on one hand, we have to encourage children and women to report and say, you should report. There is a website. You can even report on cybercrime.gov anonymously. You can report with your name. So we're constantly encouraging them. But then when they actually make that big leap, they are faced with a very hostile system. So as I said earlier in my presentation as well, we work with children to constantly engage and educate them about the use of the internet, but there needs to be an equal amount of thrust on law enforcement. Like, it is difficult for judges to understand the IT Act. It is difficult for judges to understand how electronic evidence is collected. It is still a challenge, right? So while there's this huge thrust on reporting, the state is not catching up. So I think there also we need to set a lot of accountability standards. And this judgment that, especially young adults face, why did you send him this? Why did you befriend him? Why did you send him a nude image? I sent him a nude image with my consent. He was my boyfriend and I trusted him. And now he is using that against me. So that is a problem, right? That is where the problem lies, that this image was sent with consent, but now it is being misused. So rather than addressing the misuse, the threat, they are addressing the fact as to why did this girl send a nude image of herself, which is completely inconsequential. So I think there's a huge gap there. Yeah.
That's so helpful. Actually, Shruti, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Ritesh, I'd like to add to this.
Yeah, please. I was just going to ask you too. Yeah.
I entirely agree with you, Persis. You're absolutely right that there is a lot of judgment. So even our narrative has changed. There used to be a time when the narrative used to be, do not share pictures like these, do not share videos like these. But you know what? The social fabric has changed, especially after COVID. These poor kids have no other way of sharing their own. I mean, they have no other way of contacting. I mean, how else do you do this? So I realized at a certain point in time that the narrative for youngsters had changed from do not share to, when you're sharing, what's the best, most safe way of sharing your images. But I have to say this. So I used to talk to a group of mothers from metropolitan cities, to be very honest. But this is a topic which I was explicitly told not to speak about, because it was too uncomfortable a topic, and you may be encouraging children to do this. But that apart, also, Persis, I think there are certain other methods of reporting. So one, of course, she mentioned was anonymously reporting on cybercrime.gov.in. The other is to take a report directly to, say, for example, a judicial magistrate. If the police is not handling the matter well, it can be taken. So those alternative methods also need to be spoken of, and people need to be educated about that. So Persis, very good point that you brought out, because you're right, there's a lot of judgment faced.
A lot of judgment. And these are uncomfortable conversations. Like, one of the things I always tell young girls is that if you're being asked to share intimate content, you should also ask that the other person share intimate content, because why should only you have to share, right? Because that's been a huge issue that we have faced at the trust line, this complete mismatch of information, that the victim doesn't have much or sometimes any information about the perpetrator, whereas the perpetrator has all this information available about the girl, So I think that's a huge issue.
I agree,
Ritesh,
Persis.
okay.
Yes.
May I just add a point, Ritesh, if that's all right?
Yes, please. By the way, this is Gokul from Asian College of Laws. Please go ahead, Gokul.
So the question that Tejaswini is asked over here, in terms of he took the phone on other pretexts and downloaded parental control apps. A very important part of the training that must be imparted is letting users of smartphones know how to secure their smartphone. There are both basic entry-level smartphones in Android, as well as, I mean, in case they have an Apple, they've got features in which there is a protection of downloads and protection at every step. So in case there's a download happening, there has to be an authentication that happens prior to the download happening. The problem is a lack of understanding of such technology, and therefore that becomes a very important conversational point. You can acquire technology, but to acquire the skills to safeguard yourself while using that technology is equally important. So there are features, Tejaswini, in the most basic of Android phones also, there are features in which in the settings, you can go and change this setting in such a manner that it would require a password authentication prior to downloading of any new software onto the device.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Gokul, for pointing that out. I think that's an important. Sorry, were you saying something, Gokul?
No, nothing at all.
Yeah, I was just saying that, so while that is something that we have to train, the other issue I think which Shuchi and Persis also were pointing out, that especially in rural areas, you will see a lot of, sharing of phones. So there would be like one smartphone or one feature phone, and the husband has taken it out and taken it with him when he's gone for work, and when he comes back in the evening is when the wife uses, and vice versa. You'll see a lot of women in self-help groups who have sort of invested in smartphones, but is also allowing the kid and the husband to use it. It sort of becomes a little trickier at that point. So while what you're saying is very important, uh, it's also a sort of a social household practice that we are dealing with here. Um, so just coming back to our time, I just realized that we are almost out of time, and I know this conversation, it's so important, so relevant. There is no end to where we can take it, and I hope we can keep on having this conversation with you, Shuchi, with you, Persis, Gokul. Thank you for making the time, and with all of you. Uh, Before we close the conversation, I just wanted to say that we want to know if this conversation was useful and relevant for you. We have a short survey. Ruthie will be sharing this on the chat. Let me now sort of invite Achal, the program development lead at Reliance Foundation, to share her thoughts about today's conversation. Achal, over to you.
Thanks, Ritesh. I know we are nearly out of time, so I'll keep it short. I'll just like to thank both Suchi and Persis for being here today and sharing their experiences and insights with us. And it's been a really relevant discussion, not just because it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, but Persis, as you so rightly pointed out, that we're just online all the time now, and as organizations that are all in the space of digital inclusion, they've been really it's been really helpful to learn about not just the types of frauds that happen, but also the data involved in terms of how internet access differs across different age groups, geographical profiles, etc. So I would just like to, encourage every one of us here to take up Suchi's open invitation to collaborate with her on the cybersecurity toolkit, as well as to engage with, I hope, Persis, you can share the data, the report that you mentioned, that, both of them would be really, really useful. And just one other final point that I would like to add for our current and past awardees, which is that we would be reaching out to all of you to share some blogs on the Community of Practice website, specifically around, cybersecurity good practices that you've been implementing in your programs. And I think that would be important for all of us to also sort of learn from each other. So do watch out for that email from us.
Thank you, Achal, for that. Shuchi and Persis, I wanted to thank you again, and Gokul, of course, for being part of this discussion today. The work you do is so critical in today's world, and I think it's even more relevant to our work within the Women Connect India ecosystem. All of us who are working to bridge the gender digital divide. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to learn from your experiences. I really hope our attendees, I'm pretty sure that they have seen a lot of value in continuing this conversation with the Asian School of Cyber Laws and with Rati Foundation. I'm also grateful to our attendees for making the time today to be a part of today's webinar. I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to our next monthly webinar on another topic relevant to your work. Have a great day. Thank you, Shuchi. Thank you, Persis.
Thanks so much.
And all of you. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
Thank you, Ritesh. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you, Persis.
Thank you.